Hi everybody, my name is Jeremy Griffith, otherwise known as Los Angeles on Instagram. Before we go any further, I want to take a quick second to thank Damien O'Brien for having me on his channel. Damien is a good friend of mine, an incredible magician, and a very generous soul. So Damien, thank you. As far as the effect is a location effect, but it's impromptu, meaning that you could do it with a borrowed deck. There's no preparation ahead of time, and I'm very, very much into big effects that require very, very small secrets. So let's go ahead and go into detail right now about how to do what you just saw. Okay, so let's review the idea that I was practicing when I did that demo in the very, very beginning. To start off with, let me just add a caveat. The way that I did that card location was very sleight intensive and it was very table intensive. But once you learn the idea behind it, you could do this in the hands, you could do it at the table, you can do it with a borrowed deck, and I'll show you a couple of options that you'll have. But first things first, you got to learn the main idea. And the main idea behind this location is a concept called crimping. And crimping at its heart is bending or bowing part of a card or the entire card in such a fashion that it's easy to locate even if the deck were shuffled. That bend or that bow makes that card distinct from every other card in the deck. If you want to start learning about the ideas of crimping, the first place that I tell people to start is this book, Expert Card Technique by Hugard and Braué. Right on page 90, they go over the concept of a crimp, a couple of options, because you can crimp in a number of ways. And then later in the book, they even talk about how crimping gets used as a marking system. But for right now, we'll go over the simplest version, and we'll review everything that you saw me do at the very beginning of this video. So, let's start at the beginning, unboxing the cards. Everything that I'm doing in the video is very, very much on purpose, including how I unbox the cards. When I turn the deck over, as I take it out, I bend this flap back quite a ways, more than I really need. And then when I take the deck out, and I'm going to over-exaggerate the motions here just so that way you can see everything, but I set the deck down, or the tuck case down gently, because I don't want to compress against that flap, and that leaves this huge pocket for me to aim the card a little later. But for right now, I just leave that sitting over there, okay? I then take the deck, and I do this sort of curved spread, which causes these corners to be exposed. And what I do is I glide my fingertip along those edges, and it causes a kind of ripple effect along the cards. It's a very, very fun and, in my opinion, beautiful little flourish. You do have to learn to sort of rotate your spread, but once you've got it, it's just kind of a nice thing to do. I then turn the deck face up and I spread it straight so that I can show that all the cards are different. And then I grab some random card. Doesn't really matter to me, which is the nice part about a crimp, okay? Under normal circumstances, you can have someone select the card. I then turn the deck over and I put it in my hand. And here is the tricky part, okay? I have a corner on the card that I very, very much want to crimp, and I've got it furthest away from me. This is the corner of the card that I want to crimp. So what I'm going to do, because this is the thumb that I want paying attention to the crimp, I'm going to crimp the end that when I turn it back over and put it in the deck, it's against this thumb, okay? So here's what I do. I rest my thumb about in the top middle, and then as I pick the card up, I bow it. And like I said, I'm going to over-exaggerate this just so you can see it. I bow it, and then I hide it under my finger when I go to display it. Right? So now my fingers are hiding that bow, but if I showed you, there's a pretty significant bend there. Right? And then I riffle down, place it in the middle, and I push it in all the while covering that crimp. Okay? Now, when I do that, as you might guess, there's a pretty significant break in the deck. It would actually be closer to something like that if I actually had it crimped the way I normally do. But for right now, we'll leave that huge gap just for training purposes. Okay? Now, with that crimp, it means that I can shuffle the deck in a way that doesn't disturb the bow that I've put in that card. So I choose an overhand shuffle, and I overhand shuffle it in a fashion that keeps that just about in the middle of the deck. So that's about in the middle, so what I'll do is I'll pull shallow, meaning I'm only pulling a few cards into my other hand, and then I'm going to pull about half the deck, and then I'm going to keep pulling shallow. And when I do that, it causes that bow to remain almost dead in the center. Now I'm going to set it down. Now, when you set the deck down and you're using a crimp, as you might imagine, the weight of the top of the deck is going to start to press down on that crimped card, on that bow. And that's going to lessen the space that you have to work with when you go to cut at a crimp. Okay? And the best advice that I can give you when cutting at a crimp is don't try so hard. Don't try to really feel for it, because the more that you press in on the cards, the less space you're going to have to work with. Right? If I press down, I'm going to eliminate that space completely. So the best method that I can recommend when cutting a crimp is just gently approach the sides and lift. And if you do that, in general, with enough practice, you're going to cut at the crimped card. Now, I've got this crimped so that it doesn't travel with this packet. It stays down here, and there's a reason, right? I've got it crimped down, which means that when I lift at this corner, I don't lift that crimp card with it. It stays back here. So when I complete the cut, now that card is back on top. I don't let anyone know that. That's just for my edification, right? That's just so that way I know where the card is. And the way I can verify that is I'm looking for this bow right here, okay? And what I'm going to do is do this kind of slip cut production, right? What happens is I lift up on the top packet, I pull at the bottom packet, but as I do, I place my first finger on that top card. And what's going to happen is I'm going to draw back as I do this, and then the second I feel that top card clear this middle finger right here, I'm going to shoot it out just by kicking my hands out like this, except I'm going to keep contact with that first finger. And if I do that right, it'll land at that card. Now, obviously, I'm dealing with a really big crimp, so bear with me here. But if I shoot it, it then lands under that box, right? And that's the idea. Now, if you need a little practice, you don't have to use it for a production right now, but for a little practice, just try, right? You lift up, you pull at this bottom stack, and as you do, just kick out and drag your first finger along that top card and let it sort of drag along that stack. And then release. And the reason this is such a cool production is because done fast enough, it's very, very difficult to tell where that card is coming from. The top, where you're cutting, is it coming somewhere from the middle? Any number of places. And you don't have to over-exaggerate that lifting motion, right? I do that just so that way it comes down against the table so it makes it under the box. But you don't have to do that. It can be very much just sort of a flat execution. Anyway, so now it's under the box. I then grab the box, I set it over here, and I look at the card and I see the way that it's bent. And right now it's bent sort of toward the table going in that direction. So what I'm going to do is as I set this down, when I go to pick up the card, I'm going to unbend it as I pick it up, right? I'm uncrimping that card, and that was a pretty significant crimp, so I'd call it a bow for right now. But I'm uncrimping it, and then I come out here and I drop it so that it turns flat, okay? And then I can display that I've found the card that I was looking for. Now, like I said, that's if you're doing it at the table. You know, at the table, you're reaching down for the cut, and you're trying to cut at the crimp, and that may not be very easy for you. If you're doing this in the hands, the way that it might look is someone might pick a card, and then you have a couple of options. Depending on where you're most comfortable cutting the deck, right, if you like it back by your thumb, or if you want it up by your fingers, I would recommend trying to get the crimp so that way it's back here, either in this back corner or back corner back by the thumb, okay? So pick a spot, which means on this card, you're going to when you receive the card, decide which side you want it to be. And I'll show you what's going to happen, okay? So let's assume they're handing the card back and you're given the card, right? Instead of them wanting to place it back, you can just say, okay, let me see the card, and turn your head, right, away from everyone, and then display the card. And then when you go to push it in, you have a number of options on crimping this card. My personal favorite is I press my pinky against this side right here, and then I take the pressure and apply it along sort of a diagonal toward my thumb as I push it in. And what's happening is I'm getting that bow as I push it in. And that creates the same kind of crimp that I was dealing with when I had it on the table, right? So it's got that space, that little bit of space right there. So that way when I lift right at that corner, I'm lifting right at that card selection, right? The other option, if you would like, is you can crimp down with the first finger as you push it in. And then the final option, right, so this would be just the opposing side. As you push it in, you cover with the fingers, right, and all I'm doing is I'm bending that top corner and then pushing in, and that gives me my crimp, okay? And then this may happen. They may want to put it somewhere. So this is my secret. I hold on to the corner of the deck and I press down really, really hard. And I say, okay, you go ahead and decide. You just stab it wherever you want. I'm like, okay, just push it in as far as you can. And when they get to my thumb, they won't be able to push it in any further. And I say, here, let me go ahead and help you. And that's when I apply that pinky pressure and I push it in. And now I've got that crimp right there. Now, to get it back toward this thumb, I'm going to do an all-around square up, right? Which is just simply rotating the deck. You're walking it around like that. And now I relax my hand, and when I look back, I've got that crimp right there. And if I cut right at that corner, I'm going to lift above that card. And all I have to do is just undercut. You can either undercut it directly or you can do it in stages. Take half of that packet and then the remainder of that packet, and now you're back to their selection on top. Now, how you display it is completely up to you. Once you know where the card is, if it's on top, I like doing, because I'm kind of a table guy, I like doing that shootout because it's a beautiful production. But you could do whatever you wanted. You know, also in this book, they talk about palming techniques, right? In here, one of them that I recommend learning is a one-handed top palm, which means you apply pressure with the pinky and you let that card kick up into your palm as you set the deck down. And now you can reach into your pocket and pull it out of your pocket, right? This is not an easy move. It takes years to get it consistent, right? If it's on the deck and then you palm it off, that takes a long time to learn. But it's worth the investment. Same thing with crimping. It's worth the investment. Even though it's such a small thing, it is incredibly useful. So, like I said, when you're working with crimps, don't try hard when you're trying to cut to a crimp. And don't try hard when you're crimping. You'd be amazed how sensitive your fingers will get over time. And then the final piece of advice that I would recommend is one that I recommend when you're trying to use any particular type of artifice, which is practice when the stakes are low, when it doesn't matter. When you don't necessarily need to use a crimp, try tracking a crimp in the middle of a trick where you wouldn't necessarily need that. Even if you knew the entire time, you know, that card is 26 down, try putting a crimp in it and seeing if you can cut to it, right? It's a way to add practice. It's the same way that you learn to force. You always force the card whether you need to force the card or not. Same thing with crimping. You just add in a crimp every once in a while and you see how sensitive you can get your fingers to cutting at the crimp or shuffling it so that it doesn't disturb the bow. Okay? So, like I said, if you're just starting out with crimp work, start with Expert Card Technique, and then I would also recommend that you look up Jason England's work on the dead cut, which is through Theory 11. It's part of his Foundation series. It's a remarkable tutorial. He gives loads of options in terms of using crimps. Also gives you a lot of the backstory, a lot of the history, why some are better for certain situations versus others. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you enjoy this little utility, and I can't wait to see what you guys do with it. Take care.